Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, to another episode of Real Talk and Shan and Bilal with Shan and Bilal. My name is Bilal.
My name is Shan.
And today we have a special guest. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Yes, hi, I'm Vinay. I am a friend of Shan and Bilal's.
He is not just a friend, he is a very good friend. I'm sorry to cut you off, but we just start off high energy all the time, especially because, and listeners will know this, it is very hard for us to get 2 consecutive episodes in 2 consecutive weeks. But you know what? We were able to do that. We were able to pull it off this week. And you know what? Let's just get right into it. This week, we basically just have one story, because it's a pretty big story, we want to cover it comprehensively. And that's going to be the Green New Deal. It was proposed, it's been talked about, but it's been formally proposed by Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, once again, obviously the representative from New York, and she's been passing it, or she presented it with a bunch of other people, namely Representative Khanna, Representative Watson Coleman, who's actually my congresswoman, Senator Tlaib, and just a bunch of other big names in the party. So first of all, I'm going to pass it off to Sean, just to get his general thoughts on what the Green New Deal means for the Democratic House. One of the first major proposals that they have been, or trying to enact.
Yeah, so the Green New Deal, I actually read through the entire document. There are a lot of damning kind of revelations that have been kind of put out there by right-wing politicians and by Republicans. A lot of that isn't really in the bill. That's more extrapolated, and that was really dissected through different interviews or different just talks with the people that wrote the bill. I think it was written by Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, representative from New York, and Representative Ed Markey. I forget what state he's from.
Okay, so in order, the first names were. It looks like these are in alphabetical order, so that you can kind of no, it's not in alphabetical order.
Really, because it goes Hastings, then Tlaib, then Serrano. So
yeah, you're right. So it's not in. It's a bunch of big names. You have that's Joaquin Castro, right? That'd be Representative Joaquin Castro from Texas.
Yeah.
You have who are the other big names that people would know? Once again, all of these people I think are doing great stuff by proposing something like this. You have Mrs. Lee from California. Patrick, you're right. Sean Patrick Maloney is of New York. Some of the other people. Those are then Adam Schiff.
Yeah, so those are all the Democrats, pretty much all the people that are co-sponsoring this bill.
Yeah.
So general thoughts. I don't think this is going to go anywhere. Here's the thing: it's really not practical, and I don't even know if it's ambitious. Because that's the thing that you've been hearing a lot from the media coverage of this. Oh, it's ambitious. When it usually means it's ambitious. And, it's usually hella impractical. And I read this entire thing through and through. There's a lot of repetition. There's a lot of talk about affordable housing. There's a lot of talk about just clean air, clean water, and all that kind of stuff that's already, I think, EPA standards, up to EPA standards. There's a lot of that kind of stuff. And I just don't see how this can pass. Like, it's just there. It's just something that is there, and there's not really any concrete way to get this thing, to implement this. It's just, hey, we're going to do a bunch of stuff. How are we going to do it? I don't know, but it's the thought that counts, guys. That's all I get from this bill. And we're going to be picking it apart, and we're going to be going through each individual section of it. But my main thought is, people are really, the people who are propping this up are really posing this as something, you know what? At least she said it. Someone had to say it. It's the thought that counts, okay? It sounds so good on paper. Yeah, so did communism. Anyway.
Yikes! He really went over. He just, Sean, don't even try. He really slid that in.
I'm not making a comparison. I'm just saying, yeah, there's a lot of things that sound great on paper. This is just a bunch of repetition,
Sean,
and just a long way to go.
It's like, that's like when you're reading a test question, and then you're reading through the answers, and you think you got it, right? And then the answer you think is correct, you circle, and then you go back into the question, and you say, all the following are true, except, and then you have to, redo all of the things. When you toss that in, that's the type of slyness that I saw, Sean. But I really, and Vinay, just pop in whenever you want, but I really agree with kind of the essence of what Sean's saying. Not necessarily, the exactness, but the idea that they're proposing something big, and I feel like the Green New Deal is being proposed, or at least presented as if it's on the scale of the New Deal, but it's nowhere close. It's basically just an outline for the groundwork of what they want to do. That's really what it is. A bunch of great ideas. It's just nothing actionable to go on.
Exactly. So not to sound like an echo chamber, but I essentially agree. There's a lot of great ideas that on their own should be implemented, but there's not a lot of detail. The entire document is 14 pages with the names included. So
that's like nothing.
Exactly, that's like nothing. So there's not a lot to go off of, and that leaves a lot of room for speculation. You've heard a lot of hardline Republicans like trying to take apart this bill based off of reading between the lines that doesn't really exist. You know, Trump saying they're going to take away your airlines, your cars, your cows. None of that's happening. It's just fear-mongering because of the vagueness. They're able to go between each clause and bring out stuff that doesn't really exist and use that to scare their base. Obviously, they're going to take away airlines. They're not. I've read the bill page to page as well. And if they were taking away airlines, I would be the first to throw hands at Ocasio-Cortez. Below knows I am what is known as an av geek.
Yeah,
I love
definitely, dude.
aircraft and airports and airlines and everything related to that subject. They try taking that away, and I will lose my mind.
Like, you need to keep the stuff that's sustaining the U.S. economy,
Yes,
right?
Exactly. When they're going with airlines, they're not getting rid of airlines wholesale. You know, you're not going to lose your American Airlines flight from Chicago to Miami.
Yeah.
Now, I hope they lose United Airlines, but other than
If
that,
United Airlines go out of business, no one is going to be mad,
I think
dude.
only the city of Newark, and even then, they'll just lobby for another airline to make it its hub. But yeah, so what they want to do in regards with airlines is instead of having really short haul flights, like, you know, New York to Boston from LaGuardia to Logan, or New York to Washington, or San Francisco to LA, or Houston to Dallas, you know, replace that by train, make it competitive. You know, people often opt for these flights when there are trains available because the train service is not as good and costs almost as much, and in the end it's not really worth it when the flight is faster. But at that same time, the flight is still extraordinarily expensive, and you have to go through 3 hours of security for a 1 hour flight. That's just not
insane.
worth it. It's insane. So, you know, have transcontinental flights, have flights from the coast to the middle, but when you're talking about between cities that are just so close together, you know, allow there to be investment in infrastructure, other types of infrastructure that make it competitive for the consumer, that make it better for America in general, and just having a million flights go between New York and Boston, or Dallas and Houston, or San Francisco and LA is just not practical.
And it's also the idea, like you're saying, right? Like, it's not practical having all these different airlines, like so many different airlines doing so many different flights, right? I feel like the amount of pollution that's happening with that is kind of insane. One of the proposals in this, right, is reducing the amount of emissions, right? So, for example, at one point it says they want to, quote, it's aiming to, quote, identifying other emission and pollution sources and creating solutions to remove them, end quote. I think that's K, that's sub-bullet K on bullet 2, under where it says resolved. So after it says resolved, that is the sense of the House of Representatives. It goes bullet 1, 2, and then it goes to K. So that's what I just read out. So
I just want to point one thing out. So this part really sticks out to me, and this isn't factually backed up. This is on the second page of the Green New Deal.
If you print it out, yeah.
Whereas, because the United States, start quote. Whereas, because the United States has historically been responsible for a disproportionate amount of greenhouse gas emissions, having emitted 20% of global greenhouse gas emissions through 2014, and has a high technological capacity, whatever the hell that means, the United States must take a leading role in reducing emissions through economic transformation. Now, a few things about this one. Yes, the U.S. has been historically responsible for a disproportionate amount of greenhouse gas emissions. We emit the most, and per capita, we blow other countries out of the water in terms of how much we emit.
I wouldn't say that part, like the per capita, because places like Qatar and Hong Kong just knock you.
No. Okay.
Relatively small.
Yeah, statistically, we're the biggest per capita emitters, but that's not the point. A 2017 graph from the AEI suggests, like just from statistical data here that I'm listing, the 10 countries with the largest reductions and increases in CO2 emissions as of 2017. The US bar none. And then half of that is matched by the Ukraine in terms of carbon emission reductions. Then comes Mexico, the UK, South Africa, Venezuela, okay, Colombia, UAE, Turkmenistan, and Japan. Biggest emitters. Tell me if you're surprised by these two: China and India,
I don't.
and then Turkey, and then the European Union.
Here's the thing, though. It's doing that. The statistic that you're looking at is doing that not based off of percentage. It's doing it based off of total output. So once again, if the United States, let's say if it like had triple the amount of, or even the double the amount of emissions that China had, right? Even if you reduce it by 40%, it's still going to have a ridiculous amount of output.
No, that's true. I mean, we have cut down on pollution as well because the EPA has its own standard on how much we can emit in terms of pollution. And we have been ramping up coal under the Trump administration, which is something that I'm not personally in agreement with.
That's dumb.
Here's the thing with coal. We also have good mechanisms in order to cope up with the amount of pollution emitted by it. There's a lot of stuff. There's heat, there's NOx and SOx, which is sulfur dioxides sulfur oxides and nitrous oxides, which we do clean up with scrubbers. There's baghouse that we use, which I was talking to Vinay about earlier, which we use all those things to a high capacity because of the technological advantages we have in this country. Now, here's the thing. I think it's slightly disingenuous to say that we have been historically responsible for a disproportionate amount of greenhouse gas emissions, but you don't say that we've also been cutting it at greater rates than the European Union, especially up until 2017. Really has nothing to do with the Paris Agreement at this point. And there's one thing that has always stuck out to me. My environmental science teacher in my last year of high school, my senior year of high school, he said that, and mind you, he actually was a part of the U.S. Army, and he had regular interactions with the UN, and he has like a lot of qualms and a lot of bad things to say about the UN. But that aside,
he's woke.
Well,
Yeah.
yeah. So he basically said that as per my experience, countries coming together and creating these big bureaucratic committees in the UN or all these resolutions and accords and all this stuff doesn't really work as much as human ingenuity and adaptability does. And that's been historically true. I mean, it's really vague to say it at that, but I really don't see the Paris Accords doing nearly as much as it's promised. Yeah. Or looking as much of anything.
Just to kind of stop you right there. Obviously, these kind of large bureaucratic organizations don't really do anything done, but that's not really the point of it. They're not, the Paris Accord isn't a complete roadmap to reducing climate change. It's the first step of many steps towards combating it. And even the people who signed the accords and brought it together acknowledge that this isn't the end-all solution.
No, that's not my problem with it. My problem with it is your economic solutions to solving an obvious environmental crisis.
No, but with the going back to the Paris Climate Agreement, right? What that was basically trying to do was incentivize countries to create their own version of a quote Green New Deal, right? That's what they were trying to do. It was trying to reimagine modern economies for future problems, which would be climate change. So that's what they were trying to do. I definitely believe that there was some reason for the Paris Climate Agreement. It's obviously not going to be enforceable, right? Yeah. No ultimate agreement is going to be enforceable. But it was a sign of good faith, and it was the fact that the world had finally acknowledged that it was such a big issue, that internationally there was some recognition, right? That, okay, fine, our economies might take a hit, but it's worth it if we save it. That was the point, if we save the world, right? That was kind of the point of the Paris Climate Agreement. Now, going back, you want to hop in, quick?
Yeah, just on that. And also, when people say, the U.S. pulling out really doesn't have any effect on the U.S.'s stance on climate change and the actions taken, while that's technically true, you could also, the reason why it's such a big deal is the fact that there's a country pulling out of this agreement where even if some states do take action, it's the view of the head of the most powerful country in the world that the environment isn't really worth that much. That they don't want to agree to this deal, almost essentially because his predecessor was in favor of it, And also in what you're saying with what you said before with the EPA, although that is true, under Scott Pruitt, and I'm not even sure, given the in the NFL there's a quarterback carousel where there's constantly a quarterback every year, like in the Cleveland Browns. The White House is like that, but with members of the cabinet. Yeah. I'm not even sure. Is Scott Pruitt still with the EPA?
No, he left a long time ago.
The EPA? Okay, I've lost track.
He left a long time ago, a couple months ago.
But people like Scott Pruitt, and obviously Trump is going to appoint somebody Scott Pruitt-esque, who is appointed to the EPA because they completely oppose the EPA, and they're going to get rid of it. That's why Trump appoints them to these posts. Definitely. And so they're going to be rolling back all these different all these regulations. Where there's a certain point where you can argue that the EPA was a little too far. I don't agree. I don't say that, but there are some who can reasonably argue. But then the way Scott Pruitt and arguably his successor are going to go about it is taking it way past the point of, okay, this is going to hurt the environment.
Just kind of hopping off what Vinay is saying, right? About, like, the EPA is a complete mess right now. Like, the current person, and the current person is, if you were here, you would have seen me, like, breathe in for a second and then just have a really big exhale before I went off. But Andrew Wheeler is the current acting administrator of the EPA. And he's basically, a former coal lobbyist. Like, he's done stuff that's against the essence and the nature of the EPA. That's very much like having someone that's very against, I don't even think you can have...
He's the pie of
he's the
environmental regulations.
That's exactly what he is.
This one is 100% on Trump, because Ajit Pai did rise up under Obama. This one can only be pinned on Trump.
Exactly. Oh my God. Just thinking about it really frustrates me. Like, this one is completely and almost unabashedly on Trump. It's completely his fault for this.
What, the pulling out of the agreement?
No, destroying the EPA, gutting the EPA. Yeah, I think we're gonna have an entire, other podcast on how many different departments and agencies have to be restructured, but that's something for another time. One thing that I really want to jump into right now is just reading through it. Right, the Green New Deal seems to be far more than just an environmental protection regulation or environmental protection agenda.
Yeah, it's also parts of it are also a civil rights bill, essentially. If you look on page, what is it?
Are you talking about the indigenous peoples?
Not just that. That's a valid point. And page 6, line 8, where it starts with E, to promote justice and equity by stopping current, preventing future, and repairing historic oppression of indigenous peoples, communities of color, migrant communities, deindustrialized communities, depopulated rural communities, the poor, low-income workers, women, the elderly, the unhoused, people with disabilities, and youth. Obviously, making sure that these groups have civil rights is of the utmost importance. But the Green New Deal needs to pick a lane. Is it a civil rights bill? Or is it an infrastructure bill?
I feel like once again we're all kind of hitting at the same thing. Like this is a perfect outline, and this will be a perfect internal memo for the Democratic Party. Like if this was what they were going at, it would be the perfect thing. But what this is not a deal so much as it is a resolution. And that might sound weird, but if you really want to talk about it, and it technically is a resolution, but they're calling it the Green New Deal. It's literally the description of it is recognizing the duty of the federal government to create a Green New Deal. It's super vague what a Green New Deal is. So they're basically pitching the Green New Deal as something that's really innovative, something that's really great, something that's really positive. And then they're just going to attach a bunch of different policies to the Green New Deal.
Which is really not, it's just like the same it's just moral posturing. It's just like, these people deserve rights, these people deserve rights, even though there are a certain contingent of people that she describes in this bill that actually do have rights protected under the Civil Rights Act. Yeah. So I just think I don't know why she reiterated a bunch of stuff in this bill. It just doesn't make sense to me.
Okay, so on the issue of civil rights and everything, and making sure everybody has equal rights and protecting oppression. Like I said before, I'm all for it, but not in this bill, especially because on the last page when it's talking about procedures, page 14, line 1, like subclause M, obtaining the free, prior, and informed consent of indigenous peoples for all decisions that affect indigenous peoples and their traditional territories, honoring all treaties and agreements with indigenous people, and protecting and enforcing the sovereignty and land rights of indigenous people. That's essentially the extent that any infrastructure bill should go into civil rights. Is that making sure that nobody's is infringed upon in the process of enacting infrastructure.
That makes perfect sense to fit in this bill.
Yes. And just having that a couple of times.
Okay, that makes sense. That's something that, okay.
Just having it expanded to include other groups, saying that their rights won't be infringed in the process of carrying out this Green New Deal, and having that clause, a couple of times throughout the paper under each kind of idea, just to make sure that nobody can find a loophole and say, oh, well, their civil rights were only protected for this section of the Green New Deal, not that section. But they shouldn't make it one of the overarching goals to make it a civil rights bill.
Yes, they need to find focus. And what I really would like, right, is if they said, this is our agenda, have a really big event, right? I don't, have a press conference, have some sort of rally, where this is the point of it, right? The Green New Deal. Use this as the outline for that, and then pass, instead of one bill, actually have a bunch of different bills.
That's kind of the way the New Deal actually came out. It wasn't one bill. It was a series of actions that Roosevelt took.
You had the TVA, you had Social Security, you had, nationalizing certain industries, you had bank holidays, you had a bunch of different things. And he campaigned on the idea of the Green New Deal.
Of the New Deal.
And that's something, something else I kind of want to talk about. Campaigning. This is going to be a very big thing when it comes to the 2020 campaign. And if you look at the people here, you have a big variety, right? You have representatives that are true, tried and trusted progressives, right? Bernie wings, for lack of a better word. For example, I said Representative Ro Khanna, who's now a major player in the Sanders campaign, and Representative Ocasio-Cortez, who is basically the current embodiment of the Sanders revolution in the House of Representatives. On the other hand, you have people that are trying to posture themselves, they're trying to make themselves look like progressives, but are anything but. For example, you have Representative Joaquin Castro, pretty standard Democrat. Representative Kennedy, once again, a pretty standard...
Obviously, before we caveat, at least in my opinion, there's nothing wrong with being a moderate, standard Democrat. It's just that,
I just want to... Yeah, keep going.
It's just, I think, sorry to interrupt Bilal, but I think what he's trying to get at is for some of it to, pander to the farther left parts of
that's exactly
the party. They,
maybe
they do believe in this part, because moderates, they're not all middle ground on everything. They feel very progressive, intensely for some of the items on the progressive.
No, because
we just don't know where they are really on this issue.
No, but here's the thing. Here's why all the moderate Democrats are moving farther to the left, because Ocasio-Cortez and Bernie Sanders, these people, as much as I may disagree with them, they really embody the id of the progressive base of the Democratic Party, which is most of the Democratic Party now. And that's what kind of the Steve Bannon wing of the right-wingers, when he was Donald Trump's campaign manager towards the end of the 2016 election, he represented the id of Trump voters. We feel unheard. We like this kind of guy who just talks like a normal person, who doesn't talk like a Washington elite.
Although their definition of normal person isn't exactly
no, I mean
standard.
Someone who thinks like them, someone who doesn't think like a Washington insider.
What Nixon would have called the silent majority.
And two specific examples of kind of wording in this bill that makes it pander to, anything but moderates, either on the right or on the left. She talks about carbon neutral energy sources. Great. We can start with nuclear, right? All they emit is heat, and we can easily clean up heat. It'll look way better than coal emissions. Nothing about nuclear, because Greenpeace wouldn't like that, would they? And then wind. There's a lot of costs associated. Wind is one of the most, on the free market, one of the most, if not the most expensive forms of energy ever. Oh, not to mention it actually requires, oil in order to make the turbines actually function properly. I mean, there have been oil leaks from turbines in the Midwest. I've seen it on images, and those do actually more damage than a lot of pipeline leaks, because there's just so much flowing down the cylindrical tubes. And not to mention, wind doesn't flow in one direction all the time, so you need to try to maneuver it in a different way so it moves with the wind currents, and that takes a shit ton more money, and it's just not viable in the free market. Solar energy, however, is getting more and more viable. But you can't just say wind, no nuclear. That's just not viable.
The thing is, like with the free market, though, the point of the Green New Deal isn't to leave it completely up to the free market, because sometimes, and this is kind of why I don't lean right, I lean more left, is the free market can't do everything. So there's certain things where what's best is not what's best for the world and what's best for the people isn't what's best for the free market. That doesn't mean one should be favored over the other. It just means that where it's not feasible for the free market, the government steps in and makes it more feasible for the free market to carry out.
I agree with that, but there has to be balance. Because if there's not that much of a free market, then what you have is excessive government investment crowding out private investment. Because the interest rates to repay that investment get so high to the point where private investors are like, you know what, screw it, I'm not going to be able to pay back this much interest.
You know what? I'm not sure I agree with that, because here's the thing, right? What we're doing through this, through the bunch of I really just lost my train of thought. I zoned out completely for a second. Yeah. Refresh like the last 10 seconds you were talking about.
Government
free market. There we go. Oh my god, I was like really hyped up and then I crashed. The free market, right? When the Paris, like we were talking about earlier, when the Paris Climate Agreement was signed, right? It was made with the intention that we know that the markets are going to take a hit. We know this isn't the most economically savvy thing to do. And even if it costs more, it's better to do it because it's going to help us out in the long run. So that's why I don't really agree with that argument.
Here's the thing. No. Here's the thing with this is where my human ingenuity part comes in, because solar energy has been decreasing in price in the market so much that it's cheaper to produce solar energy than it is to produce coal energy, especially in parts in, let's say, Southern California, Miami, southern parts of Texas, where there's like sunlight lots throughout the year. Maybe not that much in the Midwest, where it's cloudy in a lot of states most of the year. So I think this is where the free market steps in the sense that, you know, there's a time and a place for certain innovations to come in at a certain time at the right price for people to invest in them accordingly. I think the Paris Accord trying to artificially stimulate demand for something that may not have that much demand is not beneficial in the long run. That's just like that's the economic standpoint of the way I see it. Trying to rush something that is going to inevitably happen later anyway, or might not happen and might change course into a better alternative. There are a lot of people who are skeptical of solar energy. It's like there's a lot of places.
But the entire point is, if we do it in the future, it's going to be too late. We need to kickstart the industry right now to make sure that it survives.
Yeah. Also, I think a lot of times when like progressives go about this, they like try to distance themselves from like positive from being beneficial to business, which is why a lot of Republicans instinctively hate it. But a lot of this is really good for business. I bring this back to the infrastructure. Increased infrastructure is essential for a country to be viable for international business. And if the U.S. has better infrastructure like this Green New Deal wants to put forward, that can only benefit the United States. You know, one of the main issues that a lot of people have with the United States is that it's so big and it's so essentially disconnected that it's not that it's impossible to get from one part of the U.S. to the other. It's just that it's expensive or time consuming. There's no like middle ground where it's affordable, like, you know, between European countries. With the European Union, obviously I'm not going to compare the U.S. to a single European country, because as a geography nerd, I have gone through it and figured out that continental Europe is roughly the size of the United States. So, just compare. So when I do this, I'm just going to compare the U.S. as a whole to the European Union as a whole.
Yeah, okay, that makes sense.
Just a tangent. But even within the European Union, there's extraordinarily affordable airline flights, and also that is due to more lax security, which I don't think we're going to cover this time, but I have some strong opinions about that. If you ever do something on airport security,
don't worry,
like, you know who to give a call.
Yeah.
But besides that, there's a lot of rail connections between those, and then obviously the ability to operate low-cost carriers, and the U.S. just doesn't have that. If you really want to effectively get between major population centers, well, there's no train route to do that. Amtrak's not going to help you. And then the U.S. airline market is essentially run by 3 traditional carriers and 1 alright budget airline. That being the 3 traditional carriers, American, United, and Delta, and the 1 alright budget carrier being Southwest. And so it's not very competitive.
Yeah.
No,
I think wait, didn't Southwest merge with United?
Southwest never merged with United. United merged with Continental. Southwest merged with I forgot what airline. But United and Southwest are so extraordinarily distinct.
I'm just going to throw this in there. Do you think it's time to nationalize parts of the energy market?
I honestly wouldn't be in favor of it because the UK has done it and they have their own smart energy grid, but there's an energy shortage because there's just not enough production, especially private production. Like, I just don't... Here's my general philosophy. Whatever private corporations can do skill-wise, other than consolidating, that's a completely different argument, the government sucks at doing. Like, just in terms of monopolies, I would rather have a private monopoly than a governmental monopoly. Even though I'd rather choose between neither of them. Like, that's the thing.
A lot of things that end up being treated as utilities.
I hate the word nationalize. I would rather have them regulate competition.
It's not going to work. We tried to do that with the healthcare industry. We've tried to do that with telecom.
Actually, the healthcare industry is a completely different beast of its own. There's massive subsidies.
When you have things that are necessities and then you need to, they end up being treated as utilities. I feel like there should be at least strong government intervention, if not nationalization. Like, for example, in terms of net neutrality, for example, right? When it was shown that government or private corporations aren't going to act equally and they're not going to allow the free market to prosper, a lot of times you need the government. It sounds ridiculous and it sounds counterintuitive, but a lot of times for the free market to survive, you need the increase of government intervention. That's what I think we should be having.
Yeah, Adam Smith's invisible hand. Just guiding the market.
It doesn't work.
Before when Adam Smith. No, hear me out. When Adam Smith originally came up with the idea of capitalism, he said the government was only going to be responsible for taxes and protecting
regulations.
The nation. Yeah, not even regulations. They would stay completely out of it.
Right, okay.
And so almost pure capitalism emerged in Europe in the early 1800s, and that went so bad that Karl Marx created communism. So England had terrible monopolies.
Yes.
We
it essentially stratified parts of Europe.
Yeah, there was terrible labor conditions. It was horribly uncompetitive. There were private monopolies everywhere. And it was detrimental to the country, detrimental to the people.
In the late 1800s.
Well, in the late 1800s, but here it was... But the way it was in England, especially in England, was so bad that Karl Marx wrote the Communist Manifesto. So it was then when governments, started regulating the economy that the free market was allowed to survive in the way that Adam Smith intended it to be. So... it's kind of, there needs to be something that keeps the free market in check, and that's what the government.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Anarcho-capitalism is not an option, and I think we're past that point of even Marx and Engels that time period, because now we're at a point of late stage capitalism where most industries are controlled by only 3 or 4. It's basically all oligopolies. Yeah. Even relatively competitive markets and industries, even to the point where it's monopolistic competition where you have more than 4 firms very, very rarely exists. The Herfindahl index for pretty much every industry is above 80.
Obviously, going back to transportation, aviation. I know I sound like a broken record.
You like what you like.
I like what I like. But aviation happens to be the perfect example of that. Within the U.S. airline market, there's only 4 major carriers that have about 80% of the market share, which is obviously, like I said before, American, Delta, Southwest, and United. And then within aircraft manufacturing, that is a global duopoly.
Boeing and Airbus?
Yeah, Boeing and Airbus combined have just over 76% of the global market. And then obviously, and that is before we consider the fact that Airbus bought a 51%, a majority stake in Bombardier's C-Series, renaming it the A220, and then Boeing just bought Embraer's commercial operation. So, and Boeing and Bombardier and Embraer were the only 2 who were vaguely close to competing with them, with about 8% to 10% of the market each.
Embraer, that's the Brazilian one, right?
Embraer is the Brazilian one, Bombardier is Canadian. But speaking of that and tying it back to the airline manufacturing, tying it back to the Green New Deal.
Yeah, tie back to the Green New Deal.
Green New Deal. Boeing has been recently investing in a company. Let me just give me a minute to look up the name. But what it is an electric aircraft. So I know that sounds,
It sounds kind of crazy.
It sounds crazy. But the point is, it's not going to do your Singapore to Newark, which is the longest route in the world. It's for small, for short hops.
I mean, yeah, but it's a start. You got to start somewhere. Same thing with Tesla. Tesla was not supposed to be a long-term sustainable business model. But
just to jump in, the company I'm referring to is called Zunum, and it's a Seattle-based company that's backed by Boeing and JetBlue. And I think this is somewhere where if you can get if the Democratic Party came up with specific legislation, just like a series of it, instead of coming up with this vague, essentially campaign platform.
Vast left-wing conspiracy at Hillary Clinton. I keep going.
So, if they were to come up with some specific legislation that could actually do something in these sectors, one of those would be in infrastructure to invest in the Zunum Aero, which is the all-electric commuter aircraft that could replace the New York to Boston or Houston to Dallas, and make it competitive to on the bus while being environmentally friendly.
You hit the nail on the goddamn head. In the bill, that's in essence what the bill is. It mentions a bunch of what needs to be done, and then provides absolutely no incentive for getting it done. For example, going off infrastructure, right? And literally, okay, what is this? It's on page 5, line 11, okay? It says to invest in the infrastructure and industry of the United States to sustainably meet the challenges in the 21st century, end quote. Well, good. That's literally a talking point. Going a bit earlier, line 11 of the same page, quote, to create millions of good high-wage jobs and ensure prosperity and economic security for all people of the United States, end quote.
And then inherently creating this new greener infrastructure is going to come up with these jobs because somebody's got to build the road. Somebody's got to.
Where in the bill is it saying anything about what the federal government needs to do? It says
exactly.
The federal government needs to do. It's like looking at the fire, realizing there's a fire.
Here's what we need to do. Who's the we? I don't know, but this is what needs to be done.
We are the we. You are the federal government.
Yeah.
This is something that an environmental protection agent, an actual an IGO should be passing, or an NGO should be passing. This is the type of stuff they'd be like.
Tying back into the public infrastructure, and so there's one that says clean, affordable, and accessible public transit, and including high-speed rail, which I would love.
Who does, dude? We need that.
We need that as the U.S. But the thing is, when I was reading it when it first came out and I was marking it up, one of the things I looked into is where U.S. infrastructure and especially U.S. public transit ranks right now. And I made some notes in the margins. And the highest ranking nation in ground and port infrastructure among the top 10 largest countries by area is the U.S. at number 26.
Yeah.
U.S. at number 26 in the world. And then at ground transport efficiency, we're number 16. So there's not really much example. So obviously, if we could break that, it would be great. But we have to acknowledge that we're starting from behind because another very wealthy place in the top 10 largest countries, Canada, has almost terrible public transport. There's one 2-lane road connecting the entire country east-west. So that is a major vulnerability.
It's like Canada. Canada has enough people as New Jersey.
I mean, it's California, but
oh damn! You really put me in my place. Goddamn, Vinay, why you gotta flex?
Not only that, but 90% of Canada is uninhabitable.
Yeah, exactly. And the thing is, Democrats especially love to point to Canada and say they can do it. Why can't we? It's important to understand that Canada isn't infallible. Canada has its own issues. Take that, Canada. And second.
That's the weirdest flex of all time. Flexing on Canada.
Yeah.
There's way less population.
And then second, exactly, it's way less population, way less size it actually needs to cover, considering how much is inhabited. So that
not to mention it doesn't have to appropriate billions and billions of dollars for border security because its only bordering country is the U.S.
Let's not talk about
appropriating
funds.
Also,
I know.
By the way, and also in addition to that, when you're talking about like security in general, Canada, ever since the beginning of the Cold War, has been under the U.S.'s nuclear umbrella. So that means that if there is nuclear missiles over Canada or aiming at Canada, because apparently Russia wants the Arctic. The U.S. would have
just like hella oil in northern Canada.
There is a ton of oil in Canada.
Well, that's why Russia wants to look at it. They're looking at it all interested.
No, when we're talking about the Arctic, and this is another thing that they should address, is the Arctic is huge.
The Arctic National Wildlife Refuge. That whole thing is actually in the bill, the ANWR thing. Wait,
but that's not what I'm going at. Right now, obviously everybody's talking about the Arctic is melting. Sea levels are rising. But one of the good things about that is it opens up a shipping lane between the Atlantic and the Pacific that is so much more efficient than either the Panama Canal or the Suez Canal. That actually saves fuel, making it more environmentally friendly.
Yeah.
Obviously,
what you're saying is that what you're saying in a really weird paradox.
And Canada is really trying to get in on this. They're being exceptionally aggressive in the Arctic towards the United States, towards Russia, towards Northern Europe. And I think the U.S., given that we have Alaska and we have interests, obviously, Thule Air Base in Greenland, we have plenty of jumping off points. The U.S. needs to do something to address that because this is something where we can make money from it. We can improve our own standing in the world. And obviously, we're still better than Canada. Take that, Canada. But this is something that nobody's been really addressing. How the U.S. would go about utilizing this new trade route.
Wait.
How it would keep its share of the market, considering that we have direct territory up in the Arctic Circle. We have Alaska.
I feel like we're getting way too off track with this, especially when we're looking at the Green New Deal. But kind of just to summarize at this point, because we've hit on a bunch of different notes on it. We've covered, or scrutinized, I think would be a better word, a lot of different aspects to it. Do you guys at least think, regardless of whether or not it's actually actionable, as an idea, as a concept, do you think a Green New Deal is a good idea moving forward? Something that addresses, if we had bills that addressed the key points in this, do you think, first of all, it would be a good idea, and second of all, do you think it would be able to pass? Do you think this is a good campaign platform, more or less? Because the one thing that's kind of missing is healthcare. From your standard Democratic agenda, it's obviously not a social
No,
policy.
it's here. It's here. Look,
did they mention healthcare?
States with high quality healthcare. How many times? That's all it's
Just type in health. Just type in health. Because, sometimes they'll do weird stuff.
Healthcare, housing.
Oh my god, they did mention health. So this is trying to encompass everything.
Yeah.
It just doesn't make any sense to me.
On your question, Bilal, if you avoid the practicality of it, is it actionable? But in general, is it just a good idea overall? Yes, it's a great idea. Bringing the U.S. truly into the 21st century, making it competitive with the rest of the world, even the rich, smaller countries. Because right now, the U.S. is losing a lot of business to places like New Zealand, places like Dubai, places like Singapore, places like Switzerland, and those areas are embracing this wholeheartedly and gaining benefits economically from it. Why should we not do the same and make sure that we remain economically prosperous for the decades and centuries to come?
I mean, I get that.
With this the short term, 10-year mobilization, as Ocasio-Cortez calls it.
Here's the thing. Okay, I get all of that, but you cannot compare countries like New Zealand and Dubai and UAE and Singapore and those other places with the U.S. just because of the fact that each state is basically operating energy-wise as its own country. It has its own energy policy. It has its own budget, grids, everything like that. California can afford one thing, but Wyoming necessarily can't do anything near that.
I think, but obviously that's part of the actionable part. In theory, this is a slam dunk idea. It's a no-brainer. It's where we get to the how are we going to execute it that the questions
that's
really
true
start
for
coming.
that's true for everything written in here. We've all been saying this. Bernie Sanders has even said a lot of this stuff before. She just put it in a bill. and like with no practicality at all. That's the thing that bothers me.
And
most.
the issue that comes up with the Green New Deal and how the other party sees it is some of the people who are asked about it, because of its vagueness, they don't really have a general policy idea of what they meant, and so they say something, and then the hardline Republicans will go and say, as Trump said, they're coming for your cars, they're coming for your planes, they're coming for your cows, and that's why this is so controversial, and that's also why this will not pass.
You know what? I get a weird. This gives me a really big flashback to what happened last year. Do you guys remember when Bernie originally... Right now, healthcare for all, or Medicare for all, is the Democratic platform, right? Bernie's mentioning in 2016, everyone looked at it like a far-left idea. Then a bunch of people jumped on it. But here's the thing. A lot of people are campaigning off of it, but they're not sincere about it, right? I'm getting a lot of the same memories with this. A lot of people from, if you're looking at the left, from the liberals to the moderates to the progressives, what they're looking at is, this is something we can, benefit off of. This is something we can, pounce on, and this is something that'll make us look good for posturing, but we're not going to be able to take action. It's purely stance, right? Like Cory Booker, Kamala, a bunch of people endorsed Bernie Sanders' Medicare for All bill, and the reason they endorsed it is because they knew they didn't have to actually back it, because it had no chance of passing. I feel like that's the exact same thing for this. Nancy Pelosi gave them the go-ahead to be like, you know what, guys, get this done, right? Just make it, this can be what you want, right? This can be your summertime project, or your winter project, or whatever you want it to be. Because she knew it doesn't have any chance of getting passed. That's one of the big frustrations I have about this. It's ideas that I love, but I'm frustrated with the politics behind it.
Yeah. And obviously also, I feel the same way, but I probably split the difference between you and Sean, where I'm also concerned about practicality, because this is a really expensive undertaking, and so obviously the question is, where are you getting funds, what are you going to cut, and how are you going to compensate it, considering that because we're giving it money, there has to be some kind of value.
And with that spirited discussion, we will wrap up this very special episode of Real Talk with Shan and Bilal. Thank you, Vinay, our special guest, for appearing today as we talked about the Green New Deal. Until next time, this is Shan signing off from this episode of Real Talk with Shan and Bilal. Goodbye, everyone.